The mocking laughter still echoed in my ears, a phantom pain far sharper than the ache in my bruised ribs. The acrid scent of smoke clung to my clothes, a grim reminder of everything I'd lost in the blaze they started. They thought they had erased me, reduced me to ashes drifting on the wind. They were wrong. Underneath the fear, beneath the grief, a cold seed of vengeance had taken root, and it was beginning to bloom. If you have a mother who believed in you, subscribe now and join our family. My name is Amanda, and until recently, my life was ordinary. Not perfect by any stretch, but ordinary. I worked at a local factory, assembling components for electronics. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and allowed me to have a small apartment, a beat-up car, and the occasional night out with friends. My real passion was art. I spent my evenings sketching, painting, and sculpting, pouring my heart and soul into creations that filled every corner of my tiny apartment. My mother, however, never understood my artistic inclinations. She saw them as a frivolous hobby, a distraction from what she considered real success. In her eyes, success meant a high-paying corporate job, a prestigious address, and a husband with a corner office. I was failing on all counts. My older brother Mark was the golden child, a lawyer with a fancy firm, a wife who wore designer clothes, and 2 children attending private school. He was everything I wasn't, and my mother never missed an opportunity to remind me of it. Then there was my sister Emily, a doctor, another shining example of success in my mother's eyes. They both had their lives together. I was the black sheep, the disappointment, the factory worker. Mother's Day was always a tense affair. Forced smiles, strained conversation, and the ever-present feeling that I was being judged and found wanting. This year, however, was different. A week before Mother's Day, I received a text message from my mother. It was a group message to Mark and Emily. Mother's Day dinner this year will be at the Grandview. Only successful children are invited. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at the message, my breath catching in my throat. The Grandview was the most expensive restaurant in town, a place I could never afford. But it wasn't the cost that stung. It was the blatant exclusion, the casual cruelty of her words. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that my mother's approval wasn't worth sacrificing my own happiness. But the truth was, it did matter. Deep down, I craved her acceptance, her love. I wanted her to be proud of me, even if I wasn't the lawyer or the doctor she had always envisioned. I called Mark, hoping he would say something, anything to soften the blow. "Amanda, she didn't mean it like that," he said, his voice laced with a familiar condescension. "You know how Mom is. Just let it go." Emily was equally dismissive. "It's just one dinner, Amanda. Don't make a big deal out of it." Their words, meant to be comforting, only amplified the pain. They didn't understand. They were already in the inner circle, basking in my mother's approval. They didn't know what it felt like to be on the outside, looking in. I said nothing. I plastered a smile on my face and told them I understood. Inside, however, something shifted. The quiet hurt I had always carried morphed into something harder, something colder. The seed of vengeance had been planted. I started going to work. I acted normal. I didn't tell her how much her text message hurt. I knew she was just waiting to see me crumble. The person I trusted most was one of them. The days that followed were a blur of forced smiles and hollow words. I went through the motions at work, my hands assembling components, while my mind replayed the text message over and over. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. I would lie in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, the darkness amplifying the sting of my mother's rejection. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, a mask of disappointment and disapproval. I tried talking to my best friend, Sarah, but even her unwavering support couldn't penetrate the wall I had built around myself. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the depth of my hurt, the raw shame that gnawed at my insides. I just shrugged it off as another example of my mother being difficult. Sarah, bless her heart, tried to offer perspective. "Your mom's got her own issues, Amanda," she said, her voice gentle. "Don't let her define your worth." But it was no use. My mother's words had taken root, poisoning my self-esteem and fueling the burning resentment within me. I started avoiding my family. I made excuses for not attending Sunday dinners, dodging phone calls for my mother and siblings. The guilt was crushing, but the thought of facing their judgment was unbearable. I immersed myself in my art, hoping to find solace in creation. But even that escape was tainted. Every brushstroke, every line, every sculpture seemed to reflect my own inadequacy. The colors were dull, the shapes distorted, the inspiration gone. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison, filled with the ghosts of my shattered dreams. One evening, I decided to take a drive. I needed to clear my head, to escape the suffocating weight of my emotions.
I drove aimlessly for hours, the highway stretching out before me like an endless ribbon. The city lights blurred into streaks of color, reflecting the chaos in my mind. I ended up at the beach, the waves crashing against the shore in a rhythmic roar. I sat on the sand, the cold seeping into my bones, and watched the sunrise paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. It was beautiful, breathtakingly so, but I couldn't feel it. The beauty was lost on me. All I could feel was the emptiness inside, the hollow ache of rejection. As the sun climbed higher, casting its light upon the world, I made a decision. I couldn't continue living like this, drowning in self-pity and resentment. I needed to do something, anything, to reclaim my life. I needed to find a way to make them understand the depth of their cruelty, the pain they had inflicted. The seed of vengeance began to sprout, its tendrils reaching into every corner of my being. I needed to make them pay. I began to subtly gather information. I couldn't outright ask questions that would raise suspicion. Instead, I listened. I paid attention to the conversations at family gatherings, the few I attended, the casual remarks, the offhand comments. I learned that Mark's law firm was under investigation for shady dealings. I learned that Emily's perfect marriage was crumbling under the weight of her husband's gambling addiction. And I learned that my mother's carefully constructed image of success was built on a foundation of lies and secrets. She wasn't as financially secure as she pretended to be. She was in debt, heavily so, and was desperately trying to maintain the facade of wealth and prosperity. This information became my ammunition. Each secret, each weakness, was a weapon I could use to dismantle their carefully constructed lives. But I knew I couldn't act rashly. I needed a plan, a strategy. I needed to be patient, methodical, and ruthless. I started documenting everything, every conversation, every email, every text message. I created a file on my computer, a digital dossier of their sins and secrets. I knew that this could backfire. If they discovered my plan, they would come after me with everything they had. But I was past the point of caring. I was fueled by a righteous rage, a burning desire for justice. The risks were irrelevant. I was determined to make them pay for what they had done. The exact day they tried to erase me, I exposed the truth.
The following weeks were a descent into a personal abyss. I lost my job. The factory downsized, and I was one of the first to go. Not that I was surprised. My performance had been slipping for months, my mind consumed by revenge, my hands clumsy and uncoordinated. The rejection stung, but it was almost a relief, one less thing to pretend about. My apartment, once a symbol of independence, now felt like a suffocating cage. The bills piled up, the phone rang incessantly with debt collectors, and the eviction notice loomed like a death sentence. I was running out of money, out of options, and out of hope. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped creating. I just existed, a shell of my former self, haunted by the ghosts of my past and consumed by the darkness of my present. Sarah tried to help, offering me a place to stay, lending me money, and urging me to seek professional help. But I pushed her away, unable to bear the weight of her concern. I didn't want her pity. I didn't want anyone to see how far I had fallen. I was ashamed, disgusted with myself for allowing my mother and siblings to destroy me. One night, I found myself standing on the edge of the bridge, the cold wind whipping around me, the dark water swirling below. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a mocking reminder of the life I could never have. The thought crossed my mind, maybe this is the only way out, to end the pain, to silence the voices, to disappear into the nothingness. But then, a flicker of defiance ignited within me, a spark of rage that refused to be extinguished. They wanted me gone. They wanted me broken. And the thought of giving them that satisfaction was unbearable. No, I would not let them win. I would not let them define my life or my end. I stepped back from the edge, my body trembling, my heart pounding. The tears streamed down my face, a mixture of grief, anger, and a newfound determination. I was not done. I was not broken. I was a survivor, and I would make them regret ever underestimating me. That night, I went back to my apartment, not to wallow in despair, but to plan. The seed of vengeance, which had been dormant beneath the surface, now sprouted with renewed vigor. I opened my laptop, my fingers trembling as I typed in the password. The digital dossier of their secrets beckoned, a weapon waiting to be wielded. I reread the files, each piece of information fueling my resolve. Mark's illegal activities, Emily's failing marriage, my mother's financial ruin. It was all there, laid bare for me to exploit. But I knew that information alone wasn't enough. I needed a strategy, a way to expose their lies without implicating myself. I spent hours researching, poring over legal documents, financial statements, and social media posts. I learned everything I could about their lives, their habits, their weaknesses. And slowly, a plan began to form in my mind. A plan so audacious, so intricate, so perfectly calculated, that it would leave them reeling. I would use their own arrogance against them. I would exploit their vulnerabilities, and I would expose them for the monsters they truly were. I started meticulously organizing my evidence, creating a timeline of events, and identifying key witnesses. I knew that I had to be careful, that one wrong move could ruin everything. But I was no longer afraid. I was focused, determined, and fueled by a burning desire for justice. I spent weeks refining my plan, anticipating every possible outcome and preparing for any contingency. I knew that this was a dangerous game, that I was playing with fire, but I was willing to risk everything to achieve my goal, to make them pay for what they had done, to reclaim my life and finally find peace. I sold everything I owned, my furniture, my clothes, even my art supplies. I needed money to fund my plan, to hire the right people, to cover my tracks. It was a sacrifice, but one I was willing to make. I moved into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, a place where I could disappear and work in anonymity. I cut off all contact with my family and friends. I couldn't risk them finding out what I was planning. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I had a purpose, a mission, and that was all that mattered. I was no longer Amanda, the victim. I was Amanda, the architect of their downfall. The quiet girl underestimated for so long was about to show them exactly what she was capable of. Their biggest weakness? They thought they were untouchable. The game had begun. The plan started with Mark. His law firm's illegal activities were the most readily provable, thanks to a disgruntled former employee who had been quietly gathering evidence of his own. I contacted this employee, under a false name of course, and offered him a substantial sum for copies of the documents he possessed. He was hesitant at first, afraid of the repercussions, but the money was too tempting. I met him in a deserted parking garage late one night, the exchange swift and silent. The files detailed a complex web of fraud, embezzlement, and bribery, all orchestrated by Mark and his partners. It was enough to bring the entire firm crashing down. I needed to ensure the evidence reached the right hands, hands that wouldn't be swayed by Mark's influence or his family's connections. I anonymously mailed the documents to the State Bar Association, the IRS, and a local investigative journalist known for his tenacity. I also created a website using a proxy server to hide my location, where I posted redacted versions of the documents, along with a detailed account of Mark's misdeeds. The site went live just before Mother's Day. Next was Emily. Exposing her perfect marriage was a more delicate matter. Her husband's gambling addiction was a closely guarded secret, and I needed to find a way to reveal it without causing undue harm to their children. I hired a private investigator, a discreet and resourceful woman named Mrs. Davies, to gather evidence. She uncovered a trail of unpaid debts, bounced checks, and lavish casino receipts. She also managed to obtain recordings of Emily's husband making desperate phone calls to bookmakers and pawning family heirlooms. I debated long and hard about whether to release this information. It felt invasive, a violation of their privacy. But I reminded myself of the pain Emily had inflicted, her dismissive attitude, her unwavering loyalty to our mother, and I steeled myself, knowing that this was a necessary step in my plan. I leaked the information to a popular gossip blog, along with photos of Emily's husband entering and leaving various casinos. The blog post went viral within hours, and the story was picked up by several mainstream news outlets. The fallout was swift and brutal. Emily's husband was publicly shamed, their marriage crumbled, and their carefully constructed facade of perfection shattered into a million pieces. Finally, there was my mother. Exposing her financial ruin was the most challenging task of all. She was a master of deception, adept at concealing her true circumstances. I needed to find concrete proof of her debt, evidence that couldn't be denied or dismissed. I started by monitoring her bank accounts, using a sophisticated keylogger program I installed on her computer during one of my obligatory visits. It was risky, but I was careful to cover my tracks, wiping the program from her hard drive and clearing my browsing history. The keylogger revealed a series of alarming transactions, bounced checks, late payment notices, and numerous cash advances on her credit cards. It also revealed that she had been secretly borrowing money from various sources, including predatory lenders and shady investment firms. I cross-referenced this information with public records, property assessments, and court filings. I discovered that she was on the verge of foreclosure on her house, that she owed tens of thousands of dollars in unpaid taxes, and that she was being sued by several creditors. It was a devastating picture of financial ruin, a far cry from the image of wealth and success she had always projected. I compiled all of this evidence into a comprehensive report, complete with charts, graphs, and supporting documentation. I then anonymously sent the report to her employer, along with a letter detailing her fraudulent activities and questionable business practices. I knew that this would likely cost her her job, but I didn't care. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. The days leading up to Mother's Day were filled with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. I knew that my plan was about to unfold, that the carefully constructed lives of my mother and siblings were about to be exposed. But I couldn't shake the feeling of unease, the nagging doubt that I was doing the right thing. Was this revenge worth the cost? Was I becoming the very thing I hated? I pushed those thoughts aside, reminding myself of the pain they had inflicted, the years of neglect and disapproval. I deserved justice, and they deserved to pay. I spent hours rehearsing my alibi, practicing my facial expressions, and preparing for any potential backlash. I knew that they would suspect me, that they would try to find a way to pin the blame on me. But I was ready for them. I had covered my tracks, anticipated their moves, and prepared for every eventuality. I was a ghost, a shadow, a phantom avenger. They would never see me coming. The morning of Mother's Day dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I awoke in the cheap motel, the air thick with the scent of stale cigarettes and desperation. I checked the news websites, my heart pounding in my chest. The story about Mark's law firm was everywhere, dominating headlines and social media feeds. The State Bar Association had launched an investigation, several of his partners had been suspended, and his reputation was in tatters. Emily's marital woes were also plastered across the internet, complete with unflattering photos of her husband and lurid details of his gambling addiction. She had retreated from public life, holed up in her mansion with her children, facing the scorn of her community. My mother, however, was a different story. There was no immediate news about her financial troubles or her job status. She was a skilled manipulator, and I knew she would do everything in her power to suppress the truth. I decided to pay her a visit. I needed to see her reaction firsthand, to witness the unraveling of her carefully constructed facade. I drove to her house, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my mind racing with anticipation. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw several police cars parked outside. My heart skipped a beat. Had she discovered my plan? Had she called the cops on me? I took a deep breath and walked towards the front door, my senses on high alert. A police officer stopped me at the entrance. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you can't enter the premises. This is an active crime scene." Crime scene? What had happened? What's going on? What happened here? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The officer hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "Your mother was found earlier this morning. It appears she took her own life." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me.
My mother? Gone? I couldn't process it. It didn't seem real. I stumbled backward, my vision blurring, my ears ringing. The officer reached out to steady me, but I shrugged him off. No, I whispered. That's not possible. She would never do that. But even as I said the words, I knew it was true. My mother, the ultimate control freak, had lost control of her life. Her secrets had been exposed, her lies had been revealed, and she couldn't face the consequences. She had chosen the only way out she could see.
I felt a wave of emotions wash over me. Grief, shock, disbelief, and a strange sense of guilt. Had I gone too far? Had my thirst for revenge driven her to this? I pushed those thoughts aside. She had made her choices, and she had to live with them, or rather, die with them. I asked the officer if I could see her, but he refused. I'm sorry, ma'am, but that's not possible at this time. The scene is still under investigation. I nodded numbly and turned to leave, my mind reeling. As I walked back to my car, I saw my siblings, Mark and Emily, standing on the porch, their faces pale and drawn. They stared at me with a mixture of anger and accusation. "This is your fault," Mark spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You did this to her." "How could you?" Emily sobbed, her eyes red and swollen. "She was our mother." I met their gazes, my expression cold and unwavering. "She made her choices," I said, my voice flat. "And now she's paying the price." I got into my car and drove away, leaving them standing there in the wreckage of their lives. I didn't feel any satisfaction, any sense of triumph, just a hollow emptiness, a profound sense of loss. The revenge I had so desperately craved had turned to ashes in my mouth. But it wasn't over. Not yet. There was still one more piece of the puzzle to put in place, one more secret to reveal. And this one would be the most devastating of all. I drove to Sarah's apartment, my mind made up. I had been avoiding her for weeks, afraid of her judgment, ashamed of my actions. But I needed her now, more than ever. I needed to tell her the truth, to unburden myself of the weight of my secrets. I knocked on her door, my heart pounding in my chest. She opened it, her face lighting up with surprise and relief. "Amanda, where have you been? I've been so worried about you." She pulled me into a hug, her warmth enveloping me. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped back. "I need to tell you something," I said, my voice trembling. "Something important." I told her everything, about my mother's betrayal, about my siblings' cruelty, about my plan for revenge. I spared no details, holding nothing back. As I spoke, I saw a range of emotions flit across her face. Shock, disbelief, anger, and finally, sadness. When she finished, she was silent for a long moment, her eyes filled with tears. "Amanda," she said softly, "I don't know what to say. I understand why you did what you did, but it's just so much. Your mother is gone." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I know," I whispered, "and I feel terrible about it, but I don't regret it. They deserved it." Sarah shook her head. "I don't know if anyone deserves that, Amanda, but that's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about you. You've become so consumed by revenge that you've lost yourself." I looked at her, my eyes pleading. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you've become just like them," she said. "Cold, ruthless, and willing to do anything to get what you want." "You've let their darkness consume you." Her words stung, but I knew she was right. I had become the very thing I hated. I had allowed my anger and resentment to warp me, to turn me into a monster. "I don't know what to do," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm lost. I've ruined everything." Sarah took my hand, her touch gentle and reassuring. "You haven't ruined everything," she said. "You can still turn things around, but you need to stop this now. You need to let go of the past and focus on the future." I nodded, my heart filled with a glimmer of hope. "You're right," I said. "I need to stop, but there's still one more thing I need to do, one more secret I need to reveal." Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with concern. "What is it?" she asked. I took a deep breath, and prepared to tell her the final, most devastating truth. The truth that would change everything. The truth is, I said, my voice barely a whisper, Mark isn't really Mark's son. He's your father's son. My mother had an affair with your father a long time ago. The look on her face was something I will never forget. Pure, unadulterated shock. The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment as the weight of my words settled upon us. Sarah stared at me, her face a mask of disbelief. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, broken only by the sound of our ragged breathing. I watched as the color drained from her face, leaving her skin pale and clammy. Her eyes, once so bright and full of life, were now wide with shock and pain. I had just detonated a bomb in her life, a truth so explosive it threatened to shatter everything she held dear. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. That's not possible, she stammered, shaking her head in denial. My father would never. I reached out and took her hand, my touch gentle but firm. I know it's hard to believe, I said softly, but it's true. I have proof. I found letters, old photographs. My mother kept everything. I released her hand and rummaged through my bag, pulling out the evidence I had painstakingly gathered over the past few weeks. Letters filled with passionate declarations of love. Photographs of my mother and her father embracing, their faces flushed with desire. Sarah took the documents from me, her hands trembling. She scanned the letters, her eyes darting across the page, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. As she absorbed the truth, her denial slowly crumbled, replaced by a dawning horror. Tears welled up in her eyes and began to stream down her face, silent and unstoppable. Why? She choked out, her voice thick with emotion. Why would she do this? Why would you tell me this? I told you because you deserve to know, I said, my voice filled with regret. Because you're my friend, and I couldn't keep it from you any longer. And because it's part of the bigger picture. It explains everything.
The revelation about Mark's true parentage sent shockwaves through the family. It dismantled everything they thought they knew about themselves, their identities, and their relationships. Mark, already reeling from the exposure of his illegal activities and the disgrace he had brought upon his family, was devastated to learn that the man he had idolized his entire life was not his biological father. His carefully constructed image of himself, the successful lawyer, the respected member of a community, shattered into a million pieces. He confronted his mother, demanding to know the truth. She initially denied it, but when he presented her with the evidence I had provided, she broke down and confessed everything. The shame and humiliation were too much to bear. Emily, already struggling with the fallout from her husband's gambling addiction and the disintegration of her marriage, was disgusted by the revelation. The hypocrisy of her mother, the woman who had always preached about family values and moral rectitude, was almost unbearable. She cut off all contact with her, disgusted by her lies and deception. The news also reached Sarah's father, the man who was unknowingly Mark's biological father. The news that his one-time affair had produced a son sent him into a spiral. His marriage, already strained, collapsed under the weight of the revelation. He lost the respect of his friends and colleagues, and his reputation was tarnished beyond repair. The family was destroyed. The carefully constructed facade of wealth, success, and happiness was shattered, revealing the rot and corruption that lay beneath. They lost everything. I watched it all unfold from a distance, my heart filled with a mixture of satisfaction and regret. I had achieved my goal. I had avenged the wrongs they had committed against me. But the victory felt hollow, empty. The revenge I had so desperately craved had brought me no joy, no sense of closure. It had only left me feeling more alone, more isolated than ever before. I saw Mark one last time, months later. He was a shadow of his former self, gaunt and hollow-eyed. He approached me on the street, his voice barely a whisper. "Why, Amanda?" he asked, his eyes filled with pain. "Why did you do this to us?" I looked at him, my expression unwavering. "You know why," I said. "You all know why. You broke me. You dismissed me. You treated me like I was nothing, and I showed you what nothing is capable of.
I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in the rain. I didn't look back. My life is different now. I moved to a new city, started a new career, and surrounded myself with people who loved and supported me. I finally allowed myself to grieve for the years I had lost, for the pain I had endured. I learned to forgive myself for the things I had done, for the person I had become. It wasn't easy, but I persevered. I healed. I rebuilt my life, brick by brick. And I emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. Some people might say that what I did was wrong, that revenge is never the answer. But I disagree. In my case, revenge wasn't about inflicting pain or seeking retribution. It was about reclaiming my power, about standing up for myself, about refusing to be a victim any longer. It was about justice. They lost everything. I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.